Hello and welcome to Line and Ouse Commentary. I'm Holland and this is my best friend Tori.
Hi.
If you're new to our show, we rank various forms of entertainment by different categories out of a total score of 10, with only 2 points allowed for our personal taste. Don't worry, we break down everything as we go. Feel free to agree, disagree, or just find something new to enjoy. Just be sure to tread lightly, there will be hot takes and spoilers. And cut to the intro. You're doing great on those intros, by the way.
Thank you.
They're looking great.
Thank you.
I'm just, you know.
The fade, overlap.
Yeah, fade, overlap, music, swells in,
right.
Fades out.
It's very adventurous.
Yeah, it's great.
We're taking you on an adventure.
Yeah, of our minds. The uncharted territory.
This is where everybody goes, ooh.
There we go. Oh, it clicks off. Yep.
Okay, weirdos.
All right, so today, if you couldn't tell by our title, I chose the album Don't Panic by All Time Low for us to review. This is familiar to both of us. But if you're not familiar with this album or this band, I have some background information for you. So, Don't Panic is the 5th studio album by American rock band All Time Low. This is per Wikipedia. I don't know if anyone else would necessarily call them rock, but...
I consider them pop punk.
Yeah.
But I do think pop punk has elements of rock, but it's...
Some people
open to interpretation.
Some people also consider them emo, or like emo pop, or
which
you know.
Really, I mean, I guess if you were to consider it, pop punk and emo are kind of like subgenres of rock, maybe at their core. I don't know. Open to interpretation.
So, don't hate on the definition. It was recorded April to May 2012 and was released on October 9th, 2012. It has 12 tracks for a total runtime, if you call it that, of 40 minutes and 58 seconds, so basically 41 minutes. All Time Low consists of the following members: Alex Gaskarth, he plays rhythm guitar and does lead vocals. Jack Barakat, I've not practiced their names, okay. So sorry guys if you're listening.
What a sick last name though.
I know, Barakat? That is pretty cool.
Yeah.
It sounds like...
Bearcat.
Yeah. He plays lead guitar and does backing vocals. Zach Merrick, who is the bass guitar and backing vocals, and Ryan Dawson, who is drums and percussion. In some backstory to the album and kind of the process behind it, in 2011, the band's current label, Interscope Records, underwent a restructuring, resulting in the delayed release of multiple artists' records, including All Time Low's 4th album, Dirty Work. At the end of 2011, the band asked to be released from their contract and subsequently left Interscope Records. They then began working on their next album, including writing while on tour. The band worked with Patrick Stump of Fall Out Boy after completing a week of pre-production. In April 2012, the band started recording Don't Panic with Mike Green in Los Angeles, California, and finished in May. They attribute working with Green, instead of the multiple producers involved in previous albums, helped maintain consistency in the sound of this album. Additionally, all songs were written exclusively by Gaskarth, with additional writing by Green. And there were, Patrick Stump is also credited with writing credits on the song Outlines. This is in contrast to previous albums which had multiple co-writers involved. This album features vocal appearances from Cassidy Pope of Hey Monday, Anthony Ranieri of Bayside, Jason Venna of Acceptance, and Vic Fuentes of Pierce the Veil. The band toyed with the concept of self-releasing the album, but ended up signing with the independent label Hopeless Records. The songs The Reckless and the Brave for Baltimore and Somewhere in Neverland were released while the band was continuing to tour during the summer and fall of 2012, with the full album being released on October 8th. The album debuted at number 6 on the Billboard 200 with 48,000 copies in the first week of sales, making it the band's 3rd top 10 debut in a row. This album also charted on a number of Billboard charts, number 1 on the Independent Albums charts, number 2 on the Tastemaker Albums charts, number 3 on the Alternative Albums chart, number 4 on the Top Rock Albums chart, number 7 on the Digital Albums chart. In addition, the album reached number 9 in the UK, number 13 in Australia, number 18 in Canada, number 25 in Ireland, number 34 in the Netherlands, number 43 in Sweden, number 55 in Japan, and number 65 in Belgium.
Nice.
In 2013, the album was reissued or re-released as Don't Panic, It's Longer Now, with a little exclamation point at the end of that. It was the original album, Don't Panic, was certified silver by the BPI in January 2016. The RIAA certified A Love Like War, which is from the re-release, was certified gold in October 2016. A Love Like War won Song of the Year award at the 2014 Alternative Press Music Awards. So there's some just backstory and accolades of that. So if you're new to our show, some of our categories are a little different for albums compared to visual media like movies, TV shows, books, etc. Well, books aren't technically visual, but less story-based. So we'll break it down as we go, and Tori's going to kick us off to our first category.
So for music, and when we're talking about albums, our first category is focused on the lyrics and writing. So out of 2 possible points, I gave this 1.5 point. I almost gave it just 1 point, but at the end, I was thinking it over, and I put that little extra half point on. So I'll talk about it. I think the biggest thing about All Time Low and this album specifically is, like you mentioned, this was their first album that was pretty much 100% with the exception of just like a few little tidbits here and there, written by a member of the band and not by a group of people sitting in a room launching ideas that they're not actively involved in, like being a band member. So I think that in itself is something to be noted, because I think what happens in a situation like that is that your lyrics and writing end up reflecting more personally on the band member or members that were involved in the writing. So knowing that the frontman of All Time Low, Alex is his name, wrote every single song on this album makes it feel more personal. I also think that one thing that All Time Low in general is just really, really good at doing is they can make something catchy. They know how to play with rhythms vocally and like just the way that the cadence of a line is delivered or the syllable structure of a line is delivered is always very rhythmic, and the rhyming and flow is always really creative. So 100 points, honestly, for those 3 things. I circled all 3 of them. We have like on our little sheets, if you've ever used one yourself or looked at our sheets, which we have on our website, we have like little bullet points just to kind of help us remember like certain things that could go into a different category. And catchy, rhythm, and rhyming / flow is like right under another, and I have all 3 of them circled. So I wanted to just first of all just say that's a staple, I think, of All Time Low as a band. And I think it's something that when you hear an All Time Low song, even if you've never heard it before, it's very easy to pick up, and you could probably do so quickly and be like, this is an All Time Low song, because they have such a distinct like writing flow. I guess that's the best way for me to put it. A lot of these lyrics for a lot of these songs, I said it, if I had to like give a theme to this album, I think that whole theme, at least lyrically, is gonna kind of break down to this sort of searching for belonging. It feels kind of like the in-between of like phases of life. And I think that's something that can be relatable because life changes and we move into different seasons, but sometimes there's like this weird in-between transition period, and it feels very like odd, like we don't know exactly how we fit or how we can make it more comfortable for ourselves, but we know that it's kind of like an inevitable thing as life changes. And a lot of the songs kind of evoke that sort of feeling. It's like that searching for like exactly how I fit in this puzzle kind of thing. And a lot of these songs kind of feel like there's like a yearning to like move on while also holding back or being very reminiscent of like something that has passed or like a memory. So there's these like conflicting lines that sort of evoke like this lack of balance, and trying to find a new balance. And it sounds very deep, but it's packaged into these songs that are like very fun and like toe tappy and like kind of rock. And you're like, and I think this is sort of indicative to pop punk as a genre, which that is how I would classify All Time Low in general. Is they're a pop punk band in my mind. That's kind of where they fit. Kind of like you said, it's open for interpretation. Wikipedia calls them rock, indie, emo. Like, these are all titles that have been used for All Time Low, but in my head, they're a pop punk band. And so I think that sort of lack of balance, trying to find a balance in life, is very indicative to this era of pop punk, where it's kind of like, I'm growing up, I'm now technically an adult, and I still feel like a lost child sometimes, and I'm looking back at like the years that I guess we would consider like the golden years of youth, and now I'm stepping out of that, and like, will I ever have that sort of feeling again? And there's a lot of that happens in this album. I don't think that's a negative by any means, but it is something that we have seen before. So I say it like that because I don't think it's necessarily a new concept, but I don't think it necessarily has to be new, because really what music is an expression of whatever. And if that is something that probably evidently is going through the life or head of Alex, who wrote pretty much all of these songs by himself, then I'm more apt to accept that they're all a little bit samey, knowing that he had the biggest hand in writing all of them. If I wouldn't accept it, if it was like a room full of crotchety old men who have been writing songs for 40 years and they've been hired to write songs for All Time Low and now they're all the same, I don't accept it at that point, because number one, it feels more impersonal. Number two, then I'm like, well, you could have mixed it up if you've been writing songs that long. But I think that's why the background of this album, I think, is important in knowing how everything was written and how the lyrics are delivered. I think it makes a big difference. So I'm glad you gave the background. It's something that I had researched while prepping for this, so I'm glad that you kind of gave that to everybody, so that what I'm saying kind of has like a context there. The song Live and Let Go, I think, is a really big example of this whole I have to move forward, but I'm still kind of holding on to whatever, fill in the blank. That sort of inner conflict is really, really evident in the song Live and Let Go. One thing I really like that a lot of the writing uses is this sort of like fantasy / magical story analogies, and they pop up quite a bit in this album. They're usually used to make like a point or like paint a picture, and I think that it's a nice creative way to sort of it almost like lightens up like a heavy point or a heavy topic, is to kind of give it this sort of storybook idea in the head. I mean, for instance, something like the song Somewhere in Neverland. Mm-hmm. Perfect example. We are putting kind of like what could be a very heavy and sad vibe, especially in the verses, and we're going to instead encapsulate it in something that's a little more lighthearted, a little more storybook, and that's the idea of Neverland and Peter Pan and the Lost Boys. And I think that's a good example of sort of taking something that could otherwise, like, that song could be written as a ballad, like a real sad ballad. It could. And they don't package it that way. And
another one, if these sheets were the States, mm-hmm. that could be a really sad song. Mm-hmm. And I'm just going to tag on, because that was a point I was going to make, is that, like, that song is very, it has these nice, like, metaphors, and, like, the packaging of it is almost whimsical. Like, if the sheets were the States, I'd just fold them end over end to bring you closer to me. Mm-hmm. And this kind of falls into production maybe, but it's a really happy sounding song, but the lyrically, just at face value, could be a really sad ballad. And Absolutely. It's not.
Yeah, exactly. So those are the majority of my notes there. The reason I did not give it full points is because while I acknowledge that there's a lot of sincerity in this, I do think, and this also bleeds into another category that I'll talk about later, but I do think that because so much of the songs kind of talk about the same sort of idea or same sort of I guess like emotion or expression, there does tend to be a little bit of like lyric fatigue, I think, or concept fatigue. Maybe this would fall under like overuse of concept. So that's the biggest reason I didn't give it full points. I don't want to make it come across like it's a huge downer, but because it's very evident, like what I said before, that like this was written from something personal, and there's a level of sincerity there that I respect and appreciate from an artist. But it does, for me as a listener, I'm kind of like, I'm ready for a new idea here. I'm ready for a change up. And you just don't really get that at any point in this album. Not a significant one, at least. So 1.5 points out of 2 for me.
Cool. So for lyrics and writing, I was really torn, and you may have persuaded me, but I haven't committed to it yet. But I gave this 1 out of 2.
Okay.
I
was almost about to do that, because there was a point, and I'll talk about it later on, kind of like, oh my gosh, I'm ready to just like move along.
Mm-hmm.
But it was the context of the writing that ended up giving it an extra half point for me. So.
And that was a factor I considered, and I really went back and forth, because I think there should be credit where credit's due, especially when the member or members of the band write their own music, especially when it's the entirety, a whole album. There's even a lot of bands that will write maybe 2/3 of the album, and then they have co-writers come in and help, maybe they'll pick up a song here or there that they didn't write, or maybe they'll throw in a cover here or there. So I think there should be recognition of the fact that Alex Gaskarth wrote all the songs.
Yeah.
And he had some help with their producer, but that honestly, that's not a discredit. Like, that's to be expected.
No. And honestly, it's the job of a producer is to kind of fill in something that may not be super smooth or may need some clarity. Like, that's kind of their job. So I accept it.
Mm-hmm. Or change some lines here or there, or reword things. But I feel like it kind of missed the mark for a lot of things that you kind of touched on. I do think there's a little bit of fatigue there. My kind of overall, like, summation of this album, and I enjoy a lot of the songs on this album, but full disclosure, I don't recall ever listening to this album all the way through. I've just kind of like picked songs here or there, or like if a song started, like when I've just been listening casually, if a song started and I wasn't feeling it, I'd just skip it and go to the next one. So this is really the first time I've listened to the entirety of the album. And kind of my summation of this album, I think where it's great. And where it's not great, it's really not great. And so I feel like there's a lot of hits and misses, and I think the hits are incredible and they're done really well, but where it falls flat, it kind of falls flat. So, and I think that's true with almost every category in this album. In my, spoiler alert, I did see that reflected in a large portion of these different categories.
That happened to me too.
So I'll touch on it, just strictly lyrics. I think that this album as a whole, an all-time low as a whole, is underratedly poetic, especially for an all-male band. I think that a lot of the lyrics are extremely poetic in, even in Backseat Serenade, there's a lot of alliteration used in that makes that song really catchy. But then if you just like read it like you were reading a poem, you'd be like, this is actually really like impressive. Mm-hmm. I'm gonna pull up the lyrics. Okay, are you ready? Mm-hmm. Okay, so like for example, in Backseat Serenade, just the first verse of it is, lazy lover, find a place for me again. You felt it once before, I know you did. I can see it. Whiskey princess, drink me under, pull me in. You had me at come over, boy. I need a friend, I understand. And so it's just like, that's just written really, really well. Like, if you just read that at a poetry reading, like, you'd be like, this is not bad. Like,
all the people would be like,
yeah. I mean, maybe not that good, but, and then it's just done really well. I think If the Sheets Were the States is like really well written. I think it's highly underrated for for the pop punk genre. But he says, in verse 2 specifically, he says, this room's become a mausoleum filled with relics of regret. There's like that alliteration in there again. Paying dues to every moment wasted on words left unsaid. Collisions of a finer love I'd kill for one more way to tell you how you make me better every day. And again, like that song could be like so sad and like depressing and like about a love you don't have with you. And yet it's such a catchy, like hopeful song. Mm-hmm. Like they lyrically, a lot of the songs that maybe it's why people would say it's emo, like could be really like deep and sad and kind of soulful,
and it exposes quite a bit of like hurt, like personal hurt,
right?
Like
vulnerability.
There is a lot of that present,
and yet it's written in a way where you don't listen to this album and you come away depressed.
Yeah. Like you're not crying when you listen to this,
right? And I think it's also written very well in that the songs that maybe topically could be very sad, there's like a thread of hope at the end. Like even Somewhere in Neverland, like that's another song. It could be very, very sad and depressing, but it's kind of like, you know, in the chorus you're singing, you know, run away with me. I know it sounds crazy, like, but there's kind of light at the end of the tunnel, even though like life is changing, people are changing, we're not who we used to be, we don't have the same like carefree innocence that we used to have. And so I think overall it's lyrically written very well, and it's kind of surprising. And I'm not saying that this is like an end-all be-all of the pop-punk genre, but it's kind of surprising because you would expect a lot of this lyrical poetry and just the way that it's compiled, you'd expect it from more of like a singer-songwriter artist, maybe packaged more in like a Taylor Swift folklore type of album than you would expect on like this like pop punk album that's an all boy band.
Right.
So I think that is just a very big like area where lyrically this album I think is very underrated. I think it's really catchy. You kind of touched on some points already. Overall, it's really catchy. It's got a great rhythm. The cadence of the words are just really fun to like sing along to or even just listen to. I think that all of the songs lyrically, it's really easy to figure out kind of what's going on without it being overly simple. So the hits, I think, are really good hits. Even, you know, the Reckless and the Brave, like, and like you said, the kind of thematic elements of the album, I kind of mentioned that as well in my notes that, and I think that the vocabulary and the writing style, it feels like an independent record. So it feels more like this band that's maybe like coming from a grassroots movement, and it doesn't feel like it's very coached and put together. And I like all of that. I think it fits the album very well. But unfortunately, I think there are a lot of areas where kind of the writing falls a little bit flat. For you to have like not the pinnacle, but for you to have these songs that are really like high quality, you know, just have a bit more intricacy. And I'm not saying every song has to be, you know, a masterpiece, but there are some parts of the song there are some songs where either the song as a whole or a part of it just feels really elementary and like rudimentary. I had a couple of specifics in The Irony of Choking on a Lifesaver. The nanas in the song, like it just feels lazy. It feels, and then it just kind of makes the rest of the song feel really sophomoric. Like we're listening to a high school talent show band instead of like a professional band that this is their fifth album. Yeah. It feels like this was their first album and they sang this song at a high school talent show and it was a hit with their friends, so they just kept it on the album. Just really high school-ish, I guess would be the best way I could describe it. The song Outlines, I don't like that song at all. I don't think it's on par with the rest of the album lyrically. I get that Patrick Stump helped write it, and, you know, this is no knock to him or Fall Out Boy or fans of Fall Out Boy, but it just doesn't feel like it fits this album.
Sure.
And so I'm like, to me, that I got to that song in my listen through, and I'm like, oh no, can I skip this? Like, it's just not on par. It's boring. Like, and maybe I was getting a little bit of kind of what you mentioned. I think there is some fatigue that you develop in listening to this album all the way through. There were some parts of this, the song "I'll Paint You Wings" that I felt like that song was kind of confusing. I had the lyrics pulled up like while I was listening to it, and I was like, am I just dumb? But I'm not figuring out like who's having wings painted. Like, I thought the whole song is about like, this girl isn't worth your time, so I'll paint you wings. But then he's singing, I'll paint her wings. So what's like, what are you trying to get somebody out of a relationship that's not worth it? It's a little confusing
because it kind of feels like it's almost like the subject matter switches
right
like, at some point during this song, but it is confusing because I think the idea is like, I can't save you, but I can help give you the tools to save yourself, kind of thing is like kind of the idea.
But then the person that's having wings painted, I feel like switches.
Right. It's like the subject switches. And it is confusing.
Yeah. And like, is he singing? Yeah. So I was just a little confused in that song, and you know, maybe I'm just, you know, dumb and I haven't listened to it enough to catch all of that. And then the last song of the album, So Long, Thanks for the Booze, all the, like, anytime, I feel like if it's not done right, anytime you put, like, you have lyrics like gimme gimme in a song, it sounds like a Chuck E. Cheese song. Like, I'm like, what is this? Like, and I get it's kind of like the last song of the album, and it's kind of like a big, like, they're trying to stick it to their label or something like that, their prior label, and it was like, So Long, Thanks for the Booze, like a We Out to their last label, and like, I get it, that it's just kind of like it's just like an anthem, like against their prior album or something like that, but it's like, come on, like this sounds so juvenile.
Sure.
And again, I really can't rag on it too hard, but because sometimes it just works, like, and sometimes you need these other songs to kind of flesh out your album so it's not so like deep and heady throughout the whole thing. And so I'm not saying that it's wrong to have these songs on the album, but just lyrically it's just not up to par with the rest of the songs. And so because that's this category, because it's the specifically focusing on the lyrics, I just felt like it was really 50-50 hit or miss, and so that's why I gave it 1 out of 2. So
okay,
1 out of 2 for lyrics.
So our next category,
I'm really sorry if your favorite song on the album was Outlines or yeah, or if
So
you're
Long,
huge,
Thanks for the Booze,
or if Patrick Stump's listening, sorry,
which
man.
If you are,
hi,
big fan. So our next category is singing and vocal ability. So out of 2 allotted points, I gave this 1.5. I think it's generally good, but I do have a few critiques. So I think that Alex's voice was made for pop punk, genuinely. He has the kind of color, I guess, to his voice that I think really lends itself to this kind of feeling and like this kind of genre. And I think that I could be so bold as to say that if you are a pop punk listener, you could probably agree with me. I think his voice has become a staple in the industry now, and I think it's become very recognizable and iconic. Maybe not at the same frequency, but when this album came out, for sure. Like, I think it's kind of a staple of the era, if you will. Maybe that's a bold take, but that's kind of how I feel. So I think that aside from Alex's voice, just in general, I really, really appreciate when the harmony of a song is mixed in a way where it's very clearly like heard without overpowering the melody, and they do that a lot. The harmonies are always mixed at like the most perfect, precise level, and I just really appreciate that, because I think a lot of the really cool bits of I mean, it kind of dips into like lyrics and writing, but like since a lot of those lyrics are written in a very creative and clever way, when you have this lovely harmony that kind of like builds up or brings to a peak some of the like I guess like best parts of a song, it really, really helps. The only thing about the harmonies though, and this is me being a critic, okay, is that it is so often just the standard 1/3 above or below, and it gets a little bit boring because they don't really experiment with the harmonies the way that I know they have the capacity to do. Now, we could argue, I guess, that aside from Alex, the rest of the guys in the band, they are musicians and not singers. Okay, I get it. That's fine. I'll accept it. But if I'm going to be objective about how the singing / vocal ability of these songs go, I'm going to make note of that because there are a lot of really cool things that they do musically, and they could reflect some of those vocally, and they just play it safe through a majority of the harmony building. Now, it's always good arrangements on like when these vocal layers get like added or removed, like it does add to sort of the overall dynamics of the song. And like when things should be kind of brought down, they're brought down properly. And when they're supposed to be built up, they're built up properly. So they're not doing anything wrong, technically. And a lot of it is nice to listen to. It is pleasing to listen to, but it's just so safe. It's so safe all the time. And I found myself wishing like, oh my gosh, they could have done something cool here, or they could have done like a really neat sort of like, you know, almost like throw the harmony up to the 5th or even the 7th. And like, it would have sounded more interesting than we have right now. I do think, let me talk about, before I move into some negatives, which I guess that was kind of half a negative.
A little bit, yeah.
Little half a negative. But before I move on to like more negatives, which I have quite a few negatives, but not anything that weighed so heavily that it... Anyway. So Long Soldier is a very interesting song harmonically because it is the only time in this entire album that they break out of the formula being, we're going to solo the first verse, then we're going to add a little harmony in as we're building up, and then we're going to have a 3-part harmony for the chorus, and then we're going to do it again for the second verse, and then we're going to build it again, and then we're going to have the bridge that starts low, and then we're going to add some voices in. So the only time that formula is broken is in So Long Soldier. And they start the song with, I heard 4 parts, a 4-part harmony. It's the only time they break the mold. And while I like the song So Long Soldier, I feel like so they've proven that they can break the mold and do something different. Why could we not do that on something like For Baltimore, or like one of the songs like The Reckless and the Brave, like one of their songs that's like the highlight of this album? And so it frustrated me a little bit because I was like, okay, we have something different. We have something new. And number one, that's also one of the shortest songs on the album, I'm pretty sure. Let me look.
I think it is. I think it is one of them.
Yep, it's 2:49. It's the only song that's it's the shortest song on the entire album. And it's the one time where I was like, okay, we're getting somewhere. We're doing something different. And then it was like over. And I was like, this felt more like a full band interlude than it did like a showcase of like the vocal ability that is possible. So it was like a tease of like this potential that we had and was not fully realized throughout the rest of the album. So in a way, this is also like a half positive, half negative, because I thought it was really cool and it sounded great. And I'm like, oh, something different for my ears to listen to. And then we never saw it again. We never saw it again. So I was disappointed about that. There are this is a negative. I'm sorry. There are so many what feels like at a certain point copy paste whoa-ohs and na-na-nas and like vocal stems like that, which I'm not against, but a lot of them start to feel, and this is like you said before, and it's true, everything is good until you get too much of it. And unfortunately, every aspect of every category we're going to talk about today is going to hit that point where it was like, here was where the fatigue started. And that happens vocally as well. For me, vocally, I think the fatigue starts at right after So Long Soldier, because then we go back to the normal safe vocal patterns, and then we never really break out of that again. And I was like, all right, okay. None of it is bad. None of it is wrong. It's just so much of the same that too much of the same, I think, starts to feel bad. It may not be bad or wrong, but it starts to feel kind of bad. And another thing is that I feel like I wasn't sure whether to put this in lyrics or in singing, and I eventually put it in singing. But I do think there is a little bit of a lack of emotional depth / range. We're singing sad things, and we're singing them in a pop punk way, so they're kind of disguised. So like, I get that your vocals are probably not going to be sung in like this like soulful sad way. Like, it's not going to be sung like, you know, an R&B artist talking about, you know, how their wife left them because whatever. Like, it's not going to sound like that vocally, and that's okay. But I want a little bit of like this emotional range, and I feel like we kind of stay in the same wheelhouse the whole time. So really, I would say you could umbrella all of my negatives about this category as too much of the same. It's just too much of the same again. That is where I think if we had the mix-up that my ear wanted, this would be a perfect 2 points. But there was just so much of playing it safe and doing the same pattern, and the pattern is not really the same in regards to lyrics, although the theme is the same. So I don't want to say that, like, you know, this is strictly with like how the vocals sound and how the arrangement of those harmonies comes. But it hits the fatigue. And so I just couldn't give it the full 2 points because of that. And I just went with the 1.5.
All right. So for singing / vocal ability, I gave this 1 out of 2 points. And you pretty much touched on like the biggest reasons why. I think that I'm just a little more harsh with my critique, I guess, because I think that vocally kind of, well, I'll touch on this in other categories as well. This is kind of the theme of my review, I guess. I feel like once you get halfway through the album, you're a bit worn out.
Yeah.
And so I think once you get halfway through the album, you've heard about every like flex that vocally can happen.
There's
on this
nothing
album.
left in the wheelhouse by the time you hit the halfway point. There are no more surprises.
No. And although I do agree, I think that All Time Low's vocal sound is really like an epitome of pop punk. And I think that especially now, it's looking back on All Time Low's music, I think it really is a lot of what people think of when they think of pop punk is the way that All Time Low sounds, just vocally.
Yeah.
So I got to give them credit there. But I also don't think that, and this is not a negative, I mean, Alex Gaskarth does not have the best voice you've ever heard.
Sure.
He just doesn't. I mean, even in the genre of pop punk, he's not Hayley Williams. He's not Brendan Urie.
He's not Patrick Stump.
He's not Patrick Stump. I mean, and that's not a discredit to him as an artist. He does what he does well.
Yeah.
And he's consistent.
And I think, like I said, I think he's iconic. But yeah. I agree that he is not the best.
So vocally, I can't give him full points because I just named like 3 musicians who do sing vocally, have maybe a better range, maybe a better sound. You know, maybe they're just more like trained vocally. I think I heard an interview of Alex Gaskarth. I was gonna say Alex, like we're on a first name basis or something.
I mean, I've been calling him Alex.
I heard an interview.
What's up, Alex?
I heard an interview of him. This is a fun fact where somebody asked him, like, on All Time Low's prior album, the song Dear Maria, when he coughs before he starts the song. And they're like, what was that cough? What was that about? And he was like, my voice was shredded and that just was in the mic when we did one of the takes because I didn't know how to sing. Like, I didn't know how to sing. Like, I didn't know what I was doing. I'm just screaming into the mic, like, blowing out my vocal cords. Like, I had no idea what to do. Like, and so which gives it... I think that gives him a lot of credit for him to then perform on stage all this time without having that knowledge of how to treat his voice like an instrument and take care of it. When he's like, I'm just going to scream into the microphone and sing as best I can. And like, if I need
Goodness.
But you know, that's how a lot of people, when they really are like organically creating music, like they don't know what they're doing.
Yeah.
Versus somebody like, and I'm not saying this anybody individually, but versus someone who took voice lessons, was in chorus, like learned, you know, all these skills and then started making music.
Yeah.
It's like, clearly this was just 4 guys in their garage in Maryland and they're just going to try and make it work. So you kind of have to cut him some slack because he's not a, you know, classically trained vocalist. But also I think that you can't give somebody full credit like they have the best voice you've ever heard.
Sure.
So I did take that a little bit into consideration. But a couple other notes I had. I think overall, I like that this does not sound like an auto-tuned, like it sounds very organic vocally. You don't have this overproduced sound to the vocals. I really appreciate that. Overall, I think that the diction and enunciation of the lyrics are done really well, but there is some parts where it gets a little muddy. I'm not saying I know it's a style choice and it fits the style, but sometimes it does feel a little tough to follow, like lyrically what they're saying. I appreciate that a lot of the harmony is all male vocals, and I like that they don't have a consistent female vocal in their music because they don't have a female in their band. And I like that they don't just put a woman's voice in their recording booth and then you never hear it live just for production value. But because of that, I think you miss a lot of the variety that can come from having, male and female voices in the sound. And to be honest, like, I don't have the ear to music that Tori does. When Cassidy Pope is singing she sang, I think, on Backseat Serenade and So Long Soldier, I couldn't hear. Like,
really?
No.
Are you serious?
Tell. Like, I couldn't tell that she was singing it. Yeah.
I feel like she's almost as loud. Like, she's at the same level mixed with, like, Alex. Especially in Backseat Serenade. On that chorus. Whoa!
I don't know. Maybe it's because the instruments are just more forward in my ears than the vocals. But I'm like, I didn't even know there was a woman on the album because I just felt like, and I'm not saying you have to mix it to where her voice is really loud. Maybe they did, and I'm just dumb. But I think that I like that they tried getting more voices in their sound to kind of give them some variety. But I don't think. I would have liked to have more of the sound in, what is it? It's the song on Dirty Work. Maybe Guts, where they have a female vocalist singing on the song Guts.
Yeah.
And it's like, I would have liked to hear her more like that, where she's maybe a little bit more featured. And so the sound is mixed where you highlight her voice a little bit, even though you don't necessarily have, you know, she's not going to tour with them necessarily.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I appreciate that they don't have these featured artists now take the place of the front man of the band, and they let Alex still sing lead on the songs. I think that that's nice. They've picked a front man and they stick with a front man, versus a band like maybe Walk Off the Earth, where they have different vocalists interchangeably sing the lead part of a song. But I think because of that, it does sound very similar. And there's not a whole lot that I think that musically, just the way the songs are written and the way, and I don't know, maybe the band has, you know, more variety. I haven't listened to a lot of their newer stuff, but maybe they have a little bit more flourishes that they can show off. But they really stick with what they know, and they're very consistent, and their sound is very consistent, which I think are all positives. But what comes with that is it's also very like rinse and repeat on a lot of the songs.
Too much of a good thing no longer is a great thing.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the biggest reason I gave it about 50-50. I think that the vocals, some effects they put on the vocals, like there's certain like where the backing vocals kind of echo behind the lyrics, like the lead lyric, and then literally the same words are echoed behind it. I like that. Maybe that would be more of a production, but it sounds really nice. I like that the use of distortion on the vocals isn't so heavy-handed that now you can't hear what people are saying. I think that it's done really cleverly, and this kind of bleeds into production a little bit, but I like some of the creative choices that they made. I just wish we had more of that throughout the album. And I think that what they chose to do creatively, they just copy pasted it on different songs.
Yeah.
So that's why I only give it half credit, so 1 out of 2. But overall, I mean, it's no hate. I think that consistency, I really appreciate it. But because of that, it's just not a home run necessarily in the vocal category, like comparing it to other artists or musicians or
even the genre itself.
Yeah, even the genre itself. So 1 out of 2.
Okay, so the third category in music talkings.
Hold on, start over, because I was like fixing myself while you were doing that.
Okay, so the third category when talking about music is production. So this has to do with like the composition, the production, the musicality, like the actual instruments and music part of the music. So I think this is where they nail it though. This is 2 out of 2 points for me. I think this is where they shine. There is repetition. I don't want to say that there is not repetition. You do end up with a little bit of the fatigue, but I think of all the categories that we talk about in music, this is where there is the least amount of fatigue. And I think it's because...
I'm making a note while you're...
Okay.
Go ahead.
And I think it's because at the core of this, I think All Time Low are good musicians. And I think they do... this is where they take the most risks, is musically, instrumentally, arrangement-wise, like music arrangement. I think this is where they take the most risks, and it pays off the most of the time. There is not a single guitar riff in this whole album, I think, that is not memorable by the time it's played twice through the song. So by the time it hits second chorus or second interlude or whatever it is, like, you are jamming and vibing with that guitar riff. Those guitar riffs are so catchy and they're so memorable, and I think they are kind of like this, almost like the star on the Christmas tree of the music production. I know that's a silly way to like analogy it, but I feel like the guitar riffs, they really do stand out, and I think that every single one of them is different and distinct enough in the song that while the sound is consistent, with the guitar riffs, it's not like, oh, we heard this exact same guitar riff in this song. It's different. It is different enough that I feel like the production of this album does suffer the least amount of fatigue. The whole album starts out with this kind of like very simple, like electric vibe, and then the vocals come in. The first song on the album is The Reckless and the Brave, and I think it's a really great, like, launching pad, I guess.
Yeah, an opener. Yeah.
It is. It's a good opener. It kind of sets the stage. It gives you, like, an expectation of what you're going to be listening to. and I think it's just really interesting. They also do some really crazy cool things. They deviate a lot in the very last chorus of The Reckless and the Brave. You're like, okay, I know this chorus by now. So now you're singing, and then all of a sudden everything's different. There's 2 extra beats here. What are you talking about? Why did the percussion suddenly disappear? Now this, like, the whole cadence of the line is like later in what's going on here. And those are the kind of what am I trying to say? I want my expectations to be averted like that all the time. And I think that if they were doing that with every single section of, like, every single category that we're talking about, this whole album would be stronger. But at least we get those sort of unexpected things with the music quite a bit. I also love that Reckless and the Brave is just probably, in my opinion, the best produced song on this album.
I mean, it is really good.
It's really good.
It's really good.
When you get to the second half of the Reckless and the Braves chorus, the drums go into this halftime.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's so satisfying.
It is really good.
And it feels like, it's almost like when you listen to music, I guess the goal musically, maybe not lyrically, but like the goal when making music, like the instrumentation, is that, especially with like an upbeat song, is you want your listener to be like, have almost like a physical response to the music. So when you're like you're jamming to Reckless and the Brave, and then all of a sudden it changes up and you're like, okay, and then your body changes. And like, maybe this is just me because like I have a tendency to like just move to music. So when the rhythm of that shifts a little bit in a satisfying way, like, it does evoke like this feeling of like, oh, this feels good. Like, this music feels good. And that happens a lot. I'm really happy about that. I love that they add strings into the instrumental bridge and backseat serenade.
Yeah.
That part is really, really nice. I was really listening through, and one of my goals while I was listening through was I want to see if there are any instruments that I can recognize right out hand as being digital. And other than some like specific effects,
right,
I could not recognize any instrument as digital. I think there were obviously like the band members are going to be in the booth playing, but there are other instrumentations like the strings and backseat serenade that are added in, and they don't sound like digital creations. They sound like they brought a violinist into a booth.
I think they did, to be honest with you.
And if they
I think it's
didn't do
credited.
that, yeah, and if they didn't do that, then they did a really, really good job at tricking us. And that's kind of the goal too. If you have, I'm not against adding like digital instruments into things. Like, that's not something that bothers me, but it better sound good. It better sound as real as you can make it. And that's the case here. Everything sounds very, very organic as far as instruments go. It's really evident that All Time Low has the talent. The guitar riffs, the drum lines, the bass supports everything consistently. And another thing that the bass does is it really delivers a lot of the most unexpected chord shifts. There are times where the bass is not playing the same chord as the guitar, and it's not like it's dissonant, but it adds this enough of this interesting layering that you can hear like both things so independently. And that's the kind of stuff that I really look for in music, is I'm looking for instruments that are working together to support each other, and not necessarily like we're all playing the same chords and we're all playing the same exact rhythm. It's got to go. I'm not saying, like, I don't want it to be cacophonous. I don't want mess. I don't want noise. But knowing when to take the different, like, risks that you can take, or to try something experimental, and, like, knowing how to implement those in ways that support the music, because at the end of it, music has rules to it, and there's never a point in the production and the musicality where they break the rule of music in a way where you're like, oh, that's not how that should be. But everything is a little how do I describe this? There are moments where it's almost like a little bit of musical rebellion and it pays off. You're like, ooh, okay, that sounded cool. Oh, they did something a little different this time. It wasn't the way that they did it in chorus 1. Now it's a little different. And you recognize it and it feels good. It just feels good. So while I do think that, we've got a little bit of the musical fatigue, if you were to take all the vocals out of this album, I know this sounds terrible. If you were to listen to this album as an instrumental album, I think it would be less fatiguing. And I know that sounds terrible because we did have a lot of really good things to talk about with the lyrics and the writing and the singing. But I think that there is more interesting things happening in the music. But when you have the two things paired together, I would wager to say that most things, or most listeners of music, they're not weighing the music heavier than the lyrics. So that's where a lot of the fatigue starts to happen, is because, especially like something like this, where pop punk as a genre, I think is very like lyric heavy. And so you are paying attention to a lot of that and a lot of the vocals. I think, and maybe I'm just like talking out of both sides of my mouth here, but I genuinely think that if I had to say, like, of all these categories, what is the least fatiguing, it's definitely the music for me. So this is why I went with 2 out of 2 points for production.
Okay. So for production, I think you may have swayed me, but I gave 1.5 points out of 2 for production. I was also keeping like the melody choice of the song into consideration with the production, and I think that a lot of that kind of contributes to how I think lyrically you're a little fatigued in this album. So that was one reason. Overall, I think the highlights of this album are absolute great highlights. I love the fact that the guitar, the drums, the bass, and the vocals are just all like, it's almost like they're all highlighted in kind of their own like song, if you will. Not necessarily like this song is to show off the drummer and like this song's to show off the bass.
Sure.
But I feel like there are a lot of moments where you get to like, it's not just, and I'm not saying this like this is, where everybody's intention is, but it's not like this is Alex Gaskarth's band and these guys just back me up.
Right.
Like they really are a whole band and they all contribute, and I think that that's highlighted really well in the production of the album, like the production aspect of this album. The drum riffs that are highlighted, the other instruments and the vocals like pull back a little bit and let him have his moment. And same with the guitar riffs. I think about like
a good example I think of the drums having a moment like that would be like in that instrumental going into the last chorus of Somewhere in Neverland.
Yeah.
The drums, it really just comes down to like there's a little bit of bass and there's a little bit of guitar happening, but it's mostly you're listening to the rhythm of the drum.
Right.
So. And
all of them really get their own like moment. Even like the I pointed on you already touched on Reckless and the Brave, but like the outro of Reckless and the Brave is also just really nice. Mm-hmm. Like musically, it's just really nice that they have that moment. There are a lot of in Backseat Serenade, I really like that there's like a drum break in that, and there's like some of these suspended notes that we get to have. I have no idea what I wrote right there, but I like that there's good use of this like vocal distortion, kind of this overlay of the vocals. I think in they're in The Irony of Choking on a Lifesaver, there are these spoken words during that song, like in the background, like way quiet in the background, that are relevant to the like fill out the the lyrics of the song, and it's just spoken like words in between like the phrases, and it's kind of hard to pick up. So I kind of like that it gives you a reason to listen to it a second time to try and pick up on like what the heck they're saying or like what's going on. I want to say in So Long Soldier, they have an effect where the song's about, they mention like listening to a radio. There's a sound where it sounds like they're singing through a radio, like an
crackle.
old, like an old school radio. And so just little creative moments like that are just done really well. There's a really good balance of this variety with the melodies of the song. There's like a nice variety that keeps you like musically, instrumentally, and like with the melodic aspects of the words, singing. There's these nice moments where they give you enough variety to keep you interested, kind of like you said, but then it still feels like this belongs in the same album. You'll hear some albums and the band like picked 5 different genres and they wrote songs about all these different genres and just put it on an album. And so you listen to 2 songs from this genre and two songs from this genre, and it doesn't sound like it's the same band. But this album, it feels like this is the same band, the same people wrote it, the same people produced it. It's very, very cohesive instrumentally. And I think that in the band members' talent, that they get to try different things and do things that are creative and try something new. So I didn't give it full points, but I may change this because the songs really are very formulaic. Like it's verse, chorus, bridge, instrumental, chorus, then an outro.
Yeah.
Every song on the album is exactly like that. There isn't a single song that deviates from that formula. It's just, there's a verse, chorus, second verse, chorus, then there's a bridge, then there's going to be a little instrumental break, and then they'll sing the chorus one more time, and then there's maybe a little outro at the end, maybe not. It just kind of depends.
Yeah.
So, and then even where in the songs they have certain breaks, or like where the vocals will pause to give the drums a fill or the guitar a solo, and for even just like a couple measures, and then the vocals come back in. All of that are even done almost at the same point in the different songs. And so I noticed that, and I feel like as a layperson, if I notice that, not necessarily because any of that aspect is done poorly. And again, I think it's just a moment where All Time Low, they stick with what works for them, and they are consistent in how they write music and produce it, and the way that it, if it works, it works. But because it's all very, very similar, I didn't give it full points. Even where they choose to have different modulation or distortion on, different instruments or vocals, it all is really done in very similar parts of the songs. So that's why I didn't give it full credit. Now, I don't know if that is more of a factor in this category, or if it's more of a factor in our next category. And for that reason, I'm not sure if I would give it full credit for production because they're doing what works, or if that kind of falls into this category as well as the next category, which is album flow and cohesion. So I don't know. I think that I'm leaning towards the fact that maybe that does fit more into like album flow and cohesion, because we focus on like the consistency. Is there consistency? Is there redundancy? Are there multiple genres in this album? Things like that. But I don't know. I was a little torn.
Well, you could think about it more as we continue on, and then as we approach the end, maybe if you choose to make a change, then you choose to make a change, and that's cool.
Yeah. So TBD. One last thing I did notice: the intro to "Live and Let Go" sounds almost exactly the same as the intro to "So Long and Thanks for the Booze." It's like the same like riff.
I think the BPM is a little different, but I think it's close enough.
Musically, it's really similar.
It is close.
Yeah. Which, I mean, is that a callback?
It could be. It could be. I think you could make that argument.
Yeah.
That, like, it's a nod to, or it's a...
I think it fits...
So Long and Thanks for the Booze is more like an outro, so it could tie back into earlier things.
Well, and if it is To Live and Let Go, I think thematically it's a good callback.
Yeah, that's true. So I guess you could make that argument, but it's worth noting.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so our fourth category with music is album flow and cohesion. We only allot 1 point for this. I was very close to giving this a 0.
Wow, really?
But I ended up being a little generous because I do want to talk about some things that came to mind while I was mulling this over. So I gave it half a point. And the reason, we've talked about this, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time hashing this again. It is so consistent. It is very, very consistent. Yes, but it does feel a little bit samey. By the time we have hit Irony of Choking on a Lifesaver, I'm already like, okay, I've heard this before. And that's number 6.
6 out of 12.
Okay. By the time we're at Outlines, that's only track 8 out of 12. I'm like a little bored.
I got to be honest. I'm looking at the track list on our monitor we have. I got to be honest with you. By the time when I would listen to this album previously, I would listen to track 5 and then which is So Long Soldier, and then I would skip to For Baltimore, and that would be about...
To Live and Let Go is good.
Yeah,
I
that is a good one.
I usually keep that one.
That's a
and
good
then
one.
I'm going to skip Outlines. I'm going to skip Thanks to You. I'll listen to For Baltimore, and then I skip the last 2.
Yeah.
And that's typically how it goes. And so half of the tracks here should not be...
skippable.
They shouldn't be. There's too many skips. I like albums. I think album flow and cohesion is a perfect full credit when there's no skips. No skip albums are what I search for, the no skip albums, and this is unfortunately not one of them. Like I said, by the time I'm at Outlines, I'm feeling fatigued at this point. I'm feeling redundancy fatigue. Now, all of that to say, that was part of why I was like, I'm gonna just give it no points. But I started to think to myself, all right, is there anything that we can say here for its argument? And this is what I have come up with. And this is, so the title of the album is Don't Panic. And I do think that the theme of a lot of this album fits into sort of the packaging of that album. It's not like they have delivered something to us in their marketing that does not fulfill said thing. I think they give it to you as it is, and that is what you get. And it checks those boxes. Do I think it's like a perfect product in the package? No, I don't. And for all of the reasons that we've already said. But I do think that the theme fits the title. I think the cover art fits. I think all of that to say that cohesion is there. And I want to give it proper credit. I think it's just, for me, it just doesn't hold my attention the way that it, I think, was meant to. And I can only talk for myself. There could be somebody out there that's like, this is a perfect album. You guys are crazy. Everything in this is perfectly cohesive and it tells a wonderful story with a beginning, middle, and end. And I'm not going to argue against that person because, and this is in our description of our podcast, art is subjective. And we can only give our own opinions. And while we try to be as objective as possible, it's impossible to be perfectly objective when it comes to art and media. It just is. And we acknowledge that. So for me, the redundancy cancels out a chunk of the consistency because you have to have a balance between you can have things that are consistent and still not fatiguing, and they don't hit that sweet spot for me. So that's why I decided to just go with half credit, be a little nice, because I just think that this is not the album for me, like from start to finish, and that's okay. But I think that there are probably people out there that it is. This is, there are probably all-time low fans out there that, this album came out at a point in their lives where they needed it the most. And, that this was the album that, helped them cope or helped distract them from something. And I'm going to acknowledge that it's probably just something like that. This may actually dip more into personal taste and preference, and I don't mean for it to, because I do try to be objective about it, but I think a lot of this specific, what weighs more for me, the redundancy or the cohesion, I think it might come down to that a little bit. So I just thought it was fairest to just give it half credit and go with half a point.
I also give it half credit. So album flow and cohesion, I think it, again, the hits are great hits, and I think the flops are kind of flops. And another reason I didn't give it full points, but I did give it half point, is because I think thematically this is a really good album. I think all of the songs fit together. They all feel like they belong on this album. There isn't a single track that I'm like, oh, this shouldn't be here. Even though I think that lyrically Outlines is not up to par with the other songs, it fits. It still fits the album. Even though there might be things that lyrically I don't particularly think are as quality, it still fits. All these songs belong here. There's a lot of albums that I think are really, really good, but there's one or two songs that you could throw out and the album wouldn't miss it. And I don't think any of these songs are ones that feel like, oh, this doesn't belong here. This should have been on a different album. I think that it thematically really fits the classic kind of pop punk, young adult, rebellion, independence, angst, love, and love that's exciting, and this kind of, all of those kind of buzzwords, if you will, just really feel at home on this album, and it's all very consistent. But like you said, I completely agree. It's extremely consistent and it's extremely redundant in parts. I think that by the time you get to Outlines, you feel like you've heard the same song more than once. Mm-hmm. And it's very fatiguing. The other thing I wrote, and I think I am going to keep my score for production because I think that it fits here and in production. There isn't a single ballad on this album. And I don't think that you have to have a ballad on your album, but it does give you an opportunity as a listener to kind of like take a break.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. So you can take a breather, you can relax a little bit, you know, and it would not feel out of place on this album either. Like, this is a very poetic album lyrically. I kind of already touched on that kind of emo feel.
They really just could have rearranged an existing song to be a ballad.
Well, and I'm going to touch on this in creativity, but in the It's Longer Now version
package of the album.
Yeah, there are acoustic versions which sound great acoustically. So I don't think that necessarily they had to keep, make one acoustic and make, for the sake of, breaking up the high energy songs. But I think that there easily could have been a song that was just a little more mellow to kind of give you a little bit of a breather, or to just keep you from being fatigued through the whole time. So I think that aspect kind of I think fits into production and album flow, but kind of like we've been saying, like, too much of a good thing is too much of a good thing. So I give it half credit as well.
Okay. So our fifth category for music is personal taste and preference, which exists in all categories. So out of 2 points, I gave this 1 point, and that's because it does hit everything I look for in pop punk. I'm a big fan of the genre in general. I entered my pop punk phase and never left it. I'm still there. So I'm pretty familiar, I would say, with the genre as a whole and a lot of the bands that have come in and out. Like, there are obviously bands in the genre that I listen to more than others. And that's kind of where I'm leading with my next point. It hits everything. It checks all the boxes in regards to, like, the genre, but it's not fully satisfying me. And I find myself drifting back to other bands in the genre, i.e. Paramore, probably more consistently. I don't want it to come across like if All Time Low was more like Paramore, I'd like them more, because I don't think that's necessarily fair to the band, because all bands and artists are going to kind of have their own thing. And while they may all be under the umbrella of the same genre, perhaps, you know, I want to acknowledge and celebrate the differences between groups. And I don't want a copy paste of Paramore onto All Time Low. But this is the category where we kind of talk about personal taste, and my personal taste, I'm going to go for the hits on this album, and I'm not going to go, this entire album is not going to go into my big commuting playlist the way that an entire Paramore album will go into my commuting playlist, because the skip ratio is so much higher with this album than it would be with other bands that are similar or of the same era. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Like I said, they're not like missing any crucial like genre aspect or whatever. It's just not the one that I'm not going to go listen to Outlines. I'm not going to be like cruising and be like, you know, I really missed that song Outlines by All Time Low. That's not going to be me. But I will go, you know what? Reckless and the Brave sounds like a great song right now. Oh, let's put on For Baltimore. Like, I'm totally cool with that. And I probably will have moments where I'm like, that's the song that would like hit the spot right now. So I don't really have much more to say. Like, there's nothing wrong or bad that I'm trying to like convey here. It's just not for me. It doesn't resonate. The whole thing doesn't resonate with me the way that other groups of similar standing, I guess, in those music circles do. So just 1 point out of 2 for me.
Gotcha. All right. I also gave this 1 point out of 2 for personal taste and preference. Some of the songs off this album are definitely my favorite all-time love songs, and some of my favorite pop punk songs as well. But as an album, there are some songs I just can't get on board with because they're so similar to other works on this album. Mm-hmm. I mean, you kind of already touched on almost exactly what my sentiments are. I just think that Somewhere in Neverland, Reckless and the Brave, For Baltimore, If These Sheets Were the States, mm-hmm. Which I think it's just Sheets Were the States. I don't think there's an if. It's just
If These Sheets Were the States.
Mm-hmm. I was right.
I think To Live and Let Go is another good one.
To Live and Let Go is a great one.
Even So Long Soldier and Backseat Serenade, like those.
Yeah, Backseat Serenade I really like. You know, there's about half the songs on the album I will always come back to. They're just great. That it scratches an itch for me. It hits, my like, I guess like, it's a song that I can relate to. Sure. So it's like there's songs that on that album that I just can't really relate to. Like, or they're not it for me. Yeah. Cough Cough Outlines. I just don't like that song. But it's like some of the songs. I'm starting
to think maybe you don't like this song.
Maybe I don't like that song. But there's some albums of pop punk artists that I think it's a better album, but the songs in those albums won't resonate with me the way some of these hits do. Sure. And so but in doing this podcast, we are ranking or scoring the album as a whole. Mm-hmm. And so as a whole, I'm going to pick the hits I like off this album, and I'm going to probably never listen to the rest of them. So
it's like the highs are real high. Yeah. Like those are highlights for sure. Absolutely. And then the lows are just bleh.
Right.
So, yeah.
So that's why I gave it half credit. So 1 out of 2.
Okay. And the final category for music is creativity, which exists in all categories. And we allot 1 point for this. I gave this half a point. Now, we've talked about this in other music episodes. I am a big music video person. Mm-hmm. I like music videos. I like performances. I like to visually see how that correlates, like what creative idea they may have put in. If there's like a storytelling element to music videos, like that kind of stuff is very important to me. Not so much with Holland. It's not that you don't like, it's not like you avoid music videos, but you also don't actively seek them out, if I'm correct. Right. Like for you, it's like, I'm good just listening to the album and never seeing the music video. But for me, I pretty much always...
I didn't watch a single music video.
And I did! So they made 2 music videos for this album, and it was for Backseat Serenade and for Somewhere in Neverland. Those were the 2 that they made, and everything else is just
I think they released... No. I wonder if they... I want to say they released a music video prior to the album dropping.
I think Somewhere in Neverland was the pre-release single that came out. And then Backseat Serenade was like the title track.
Maybe, I think they released A Love Like War, which is off of the It's Longer Now version.
Maybe.
I think they released that music video before
the repackaging
came
which
out.
I didn't watch or listen to anything from the repackage.
Really?
I did not.
Oh.
I only listened to Don't Panic. I didn't listen to the It's Longer Now version. So I don't know if you're going to end up talking about that a little bit. But, well then cool. We'll have different things to talk about in the creativity. So the music videos are a product of their time. This album came out in 2012?
Yeah.
And it feels like 2012, and the fashion is very 2012, and it looks like YouTube did in 2012. And I would not say that they are the most fantastic music videos, but they do fit very well with the song. And there is a little bit of like this goofiness to Somewhere in Neverland that I think kind of boosts the idea that we were talking about earlier, where that this song could be very sad, but it's kind of given in like a whimsical storybook way. And the music video does support that idea a lot. It's very goofy, and like there's weird, silly costumes, and it is kind of storybooky. It's fun. And I enjoyed watching it. Backseat Serenade is kind of like your more typical pop punk music video of the time, where it's like, they have like the cutaways to like the really like the band's just playing, and then it's like the girl, she's like really emotional in the arcade, and like like it's very indicative of the era. They're entertaining. I'm not gonna say they're like bad videos, but it's not that what I would call like, wow, this is so cinematic for a music video. So I don't think they necessarily did anything really new. They didn't. The best way that I can sum it up for their creativity, and the reason why I think it's only half points, is because it fits the mold and it checks all the boxes, but it really doesn't break that mold in any way. It's silly, it's goofy. There are, creative things about it. I do think that it is probably one of the more iconic albums of the band's history, at least in my perspective, and the age that I am, and like where I was in life when in my head All Time Low was at their peak. I do think this is one of their albums that's kind of in that peak. And I think that even people who don't listen to I would consider myself a very casual All Time Low listener. I'm not keeping up with their new releases. I cannot sing you you couldn't give me like just some random All Time Low song and me be able to like sing that to you. Like I'm a very casual listener of the band, and I don't think that's like a bad thing or anything like that, but I think that even a casual listener, or even somebody that's even more casual of a listener than I am of All Time Low, has probably heard at least 1 or 2 of these songs if you were listening to any sort of music that wasn't like top 40 pop in this era of life. If your tastes branched out at all, you had probably heard at least Backseat Serenade. At least, I'm gonna wager. So I think that it is a milestone of the band. I think it's iconic of the band, and I think that that's worth noting. But like I said, it doesn't really break any mold, and they're not doing anything brand new for the genre. They didn't, surprise anybody or shock their audiences of like this new thing that they've tried or whatever. None of that is present. So they accomplish, but they don't wow, I would say. So that's why I gave it half a point out of 1.
All right. I went back and forth, but I actually ended up giving this full points for creativity. And the biggest reason is because they re-released the album with It's Longer Now. And I think that that's something that's not seen very often in this genre. you get a lot of, I mean, like Taylor Swift has like 1,500 deluxe versions of her albums. And, you know, I think that there are certain artists in certain genres that will do that, but it's very rare that you see like a pop punk band release an album almost immediately after its first release. Yeah. You know, maybe they'll do like a 10th anniversary or something like that. But for them,
the vault track or whatever.
But for them to release an It's Longer Now version, like like a few months after, because this was released later in
before
2012,
the year was out, right?
No, they released it like 2013.
Oh, okay.
So, this album came out
in October
of 2012. So they released it the following year, and for the original version to be as popular as it was, and the re-release version to get as many hits on the chart as it did, I think that
it was certified gold, you said.
Yeah, so. I think that deserves some credit.
Sure.
And I didn't pick, when I chose this album, I didn't pick the It's Longer Now version because I wanted to really look at the original release for face value. But this category of creativity, I think, is a good place. Like you talk about the music videos, I think that re-releases or deluxe versions are a good way to talk about or to include in this category.
Sure.
So in the It's Longer Now version, there are 3 new songs, and acoustic versions. And one thing with the It's Longer Now re-release or release, I don't know how, I wouldn't necessarily call it a re-release. The new songs are integrated into the album. They don't just throw it at the end of the track. Now the acoustic versions are down at the end of the track listing, but the new songs are mixed in, and it really rounds out the sound of the album. And I think
bet it helps with some of that fatigue too.
It does. I think in my opinion, I think it kind of helps break up some of that fatigue. And I believe A Love Like War becomes the title track or the first track of the album, and that was a huge success for All Time Low. I mean, Love Like War was very successful for them, and for that to come off of an album's re-release or like a deluxe version of the album, I think that's a pretty significant thing. It's like when, you know, again, the only artist I can think of that releases deluxe versions in modern day consistently is Taylor Swift, and it's often not common for the bonus tracks, if you will, to be as successful or more successful than the original. Like the Taylor's version albums, it's very uncommon for those extra from the vault tracks or bonus tracks on a deluxe version to be extremely successful. And so I think that that's just something noteworthy, and I think that it was pretty smart of All Time Low to release those tracks because I think they saw really good success with it. And for that album or songs from that album to chart and be successful, I think is pretty impressive because it's not common in the music industry. And another reason I gave it full points, 1 out of 1 for creativity, was because I do think a lot of All Time Low's iconic songs came from this album. Yeah. And I think it came out at just the right time. I think that, not that pop punk was not a genre or it wasn't already, you know, coming into the mainstream or kind of being in a way taken more seriously. I think that this album coming out in 2012 was a great time for pop punk when it wasn't just these garage bands that no one took seriously, you know, playing in a standing room only venue of 20 people. These were pop punk bands were starting to play larger venues, getting more traction,
headlining tours,
getting more airtime. So I wouldn't say that it's necessarily All Time Low's like milestone album, but I think for a lot of people, this was their introduction into All Time Low. And so because of that, I think that it's noteworthy and should get credit. And I think this is a good category to give that credit. So full
Fair
points
enough.
For me.
All right.
So what was your final score?
My final score is 7
out of 10. My final score is 6 out of 10.
Okay.
So
not too bad.
Not too bad. Are you ready for some... Ooh, I don't want that in the shot. See all my nasty handwriting.
Someone's like zooming in on the video.
I know. No, hopefully not. Are you ready for some lightning round questions?
Yes.
I don't have a ton.
Okay.
So, what was your favorite track on this album?
Oh. Can I pick two? Or do I need to pick
tell
one?
me your top two, and then you should pick one.
My top two are The Reckless and the Brave and Somewhere in Neverland. One I think is a better song, and one I think I have more attachment to.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why it's hard to pick.
Yeah. You got to pick one.
I'll pick Somewhere in Neverland.
All right. I think that's my favorite track as well. So it's a good one.
Mm-hmm.
But Reckless and the Brave, though, is so good.
So good.
And I like For Baltimore, too.
I do, too. That was probably...
I really like For Baltimore.
I think For Baltimore or To Live and Let Go is probably my third.
Yeah, I slept on To Live and Let Go for a long time. And it's become
it's so
more
good.
of my favorite, as I've listened to it more.
Yeah.
And If These Sheets Were the States is also a top one for me. I really like that one. It's just very different. You don't hear that kind of...
Yeah.
I think lyrically it's really good, too. What's your least favorite track? Mine is Outlines.
Yeah.
In case you couldn't tell.
I think mine is probably So Long and Thanks for the Booze.
That one's pretty bad.
I'm just checked out by the time I get there,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Favorite musical or vocal moment? Or either or both. You can kind of pick.
I think it's starting the beginning of the song on So Long Soldier with a 4-part harmony.
Yeah.
I think that's it's like the one time in the album where I was like, yes, something different.
Yeah.
So I think that it just stands out. I think a close second, though, is going to be the final chorus in The Reckless and the Brave.
Yeah.
Just every element, like the music and vocals both kind of like.
I actually really like, and again, because I slept on the song for so long, I really like in To Live and Let Go in the last chorus. I think it's the last chorus. The vocal slide he does is just really nice. It's like so satisfying.
I love a good vocal slide.
And then when musically they kind of cut all the instruments.
Yeah, everything just stops suddenly.
Yeah, and then it's just
the drop
so satisfying.
is very satisfying.
Yeah, it's very satisfying. Is there another all-time low song that you wish was on this album, or one that you think would fit?
If I could choose, if I could make a change, I would pull probably Outlines or So Long and Thanks for the Booze out and replace it with Time Bomb, which is my favorite all-time low song. But
I would probably put Weightless on this album. I think it fits really well. I think it would fit nicely.
Yeah. Thematically, I think it would fit really nicely.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yep. What song would you like to see All Time Low cover in this album style? Because some of their styles changed in some of their new music. So we're specifically talking about this. If they could cover a song.
Oh boy, that's kind of a hard one. Do you have an answer?
Yeah, I just thought of one. I didn't prep before I answered these questions.
You can go ahead while I keep thinking.
I think it would be fun to hear them cover Hard Times by Paramore.
Ooh, that could be nice. I was thinking about something very different, perhaps, and them just taking it and putting their spin on it could be really interesting. And my brain immediately was I kind of want to see what they would do with a classic jazz hit. So I'm thinking about something I know this sounds crazy, but Ella Fitzgerald's I've Got a Crush on You. If they did something like that in their iconic pop punk style of this album, I think it could be really interesting. And I think that they could adapt something like that. It would feel very different. It would not even feel like the same song, but I think it could be a really neat cover.
I think they did cover, I can't remember which one, but there's the Punk Goes Christmas albums. I think they did a Christmas cover on that song.
Probably.
I'm going to look it up.
Okay.
Because I feel like it was a good one. They did a song called Fool's Holiday, which is the one they wrote.
Oh, okay. So not a cover.
So not a cover. But I think it would be cool to hear them do a Christmas song.
Yeah, that would be fun too.
So, what song would you want to see covered from this album by another artist?
Oh.
That's my last lightning round question.
How about we give outlines to Fall Out Boy? And have Patrick Stump sing it.
Maybe we'd get a different...
I think they would change up the arrangement, especially on the bridge, and give it that classic, like, Fall Out Boy sort of, like, slow it down, make it really high kind of vibe that Fall Out Boy gives it, and I think that could add some interest to that song.
Yeah. This is a tough question. This is a tough question. I would want to see... I feel like it would fit the genre. I feel like this artist could pull it off, but if the Sheets Were the States were covered by someone like the Ready Set.
Oh, okay.
I feel like that could fit into his like genre.
Yeah,
like a little more electronic feel to it.
Yeah.
Because melodically, it's not as like, I don't know how else to say it other than crisp. And so you could smooth it into kind of that electronic style that he has.
Yeah.
Because vocally, he's very different.
Right. Vocally, he's very different. And I think musically, like, there is a lot of the dependency on that electronic kind of digital sound. And I think that could be an interesting swap for, like, the organic instruments.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. All right. Any final thoughts?
Nope. I said everything I have to say.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us on this episode. We hope you had a good time. We know we did. If you have an idea of what we should review next, you can leave us a comment or use our suggestion box on lionandmousepodcast.com. We do look at those, so please feel free. You can also find on our website, you can find links to our show notes, Patreon, socials, if you want to look at my messy handwriting. If you could, please review this episode wherever you listen to your podcast. Give it a 5-star review and write a little review for us. It really helps expand our reach. It helps us show up in other people's recommended. Just helps us get our name out there, and it doesn't cost you anything. So if you're watching this on YouTube, please do all the YouTube things, like, comment, subscribe, all that fun stuff. It really helps us reach as many people as we can. And we always appreciate the support. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we will catch you in the next one.